should spell out that we approach this problem not because we want to analyze it, but because we want to intervene in it in a way that's effective and in a way that can make a difference. And what we're actually doing is going to communities and beginning to deal with the problems that people have, and beginning to mobilize tenants. And as we do that, we see the kind of level of basic neglect of people's rights that takes place, courtesy of the landlord, and we begin to challenge it. And in doing that, we begin to build up people's capacity to resist. And anybody that knows anything about OCAP's work know that we put a great deal of emphasis on, certainly on direct action methods, although it's not an invariable tactic that we employ, but we put a lot of emphasis on that. But we also put a lot of emphasis on trying to show that we can make a difference in people's individual lives. To us, it's not enough to go into public housing and say, we have some answers in a global sense to what's going on, but I'm sorry about the fact that your ceiling just fell in. There's nothing we can do about it. We try to find ways to intervene to actually make a difference. So in the last while, we've been doing just that. We've been putting a big premium on going to public housing tenants and mobilizing people to challenge the actual injustices and abuses and neglect that takes place. I'll give you just a couple of examples of that kind of stuff, and it perhaps shows the sheer willful, bloody-minded neglect that takes place. We were contacted by a man out in a place called Gordon Ridge, which is a series of high-rises out in South Scarborough. And it really shows, this case I think shows the sort of the basic nastiness of the way people are denied any kind of consideration for their rights as tenants. Because it isn't primarily, this isn't a funding question. Man comes to us and he's an older man who's had a series of strokes. And he'd moved into a basement apartment in a high-rise 14 months before. And when he moved in, there was a big pile of earth sitting on his balcony. And it remained there. And the mice and the rats got into it and they fouled it. So it became absolutely disgusting, a big pile of, frankly, earth and rat shit just sitting there on the man's front balcony. And the smell was really disgusting. And so what he had done is he couldn't move it, so he'd had to put tape over his windows and over his door to his balcony, and he's in a tiny little bachelor apartment in this sweltering summer heat with no means of getting any air into the place whatsoever. And he'd gone to them and he'd said, can you please come and move this pile of earth? And they said, no, we don't do that sort of stuff. You'll just have to take care of it yourself. So he couldn't do the physical work, and he didn't have much of a he didn't have family, he didn't have friends, he didn't have anybody who could do it. So we employed the basic, kind of stuff that OCAP does. Is we came with a wheelbarrow and we shoveled the stuff up, we wore the masks and all the stuff that we needed to do. We took it over to their office and we dumped it on their front porch. And we said, and they said, what are you doing? And they said, well, we're conducting an experiment to find out if this will sit here for 14 months the same as it did on that man's balcony. And of course it didn't sit there for 14 months. But we've started to find lots of those kinds of cases, some of them where the conditions that people are living in are just mind-boggling. We were contacted by a woman who had 6 children, lived out in a West End community called Swansea Mews. And she lived in the place that as yet is the worst place of any that I've seen. It was in the most disastrous shape. It was suffering from an infestation of rodents that was beyond anything I've ever seen. There was just crap all over the place. Not to the point where it was just, you could see a bit, you could smell it, you could feel it in the back of your throat when you walked into the place. And in fact, all of the family were having respiratory problems, so much so that they would spend at least 1 or 2 hours outside every night in the front to get away from the effects of the fumes that they were breathing in. There was a lamp, a wall-mounted lamp in one of the bedrooms that one of the small girls had, and it was their property. It was their lamp, and a sheet of flame had come out of it and burned the child on the neck, and so they reported it, and they wrapped a towel around it to try and protect themselves, and they had done that 3 years ago. And for 3 years they'd been trying to get them to come and do something about this faulty piece of electrical equipment. The wiring in the place was faulty fundamentally. Sparks came out of the sockets, and all of the vents were broken and jagged, and she had a 1-year-old child. It was just like, it was the most appalling thing, absolutely beyond belief. And apart from that, the condition of the rodents was so bad that they had actually abandoned the kitchen and one of the bedrooms altogether and given them to the rodents. And we're now in a situation where 6 people were crowded into 2 bedrooms and a living room, and were making do as best they could. So they wouldn't give her a transfer. So we organised a series of actions. We went to their local office, they brought the cops in, took us out, we went to the head office, and finally were able to get a transfer for the family. We dealt with a woman just the other week on the Kingston Road, who, again, she's living in one of these places where they have a private property management company, one of the legacies of what Mike Harris did, but they have a private property management company that's looking after the place, even though it's Toronto housing. Her children had moved out 2.5 years ago, and they had left her by herself in a 3-bedroom townhouse, which is scandalous to begin with because there's 70,000 people on the waiting list for housing, and she didn't need to be in a 3-bedroom place. But the reason they didn't want to move her out of there is because if they moved her out and brought in a new family, they'd have to do some level of renovation before they put the new family in, and rather than spend the money, they didn't want to do that. So for 2.5 years she'd been in there. The place was so run down that it was crumbling, holes everywhere, and the back door was missing. There was no back door to the place whatsoever. So what she'd actually done is her son had found an old door somewhere on the street and had hammered it into place. Now it was a two-level townhouse. So if there was a fire, she couldn't open the door and get out. On the other hand, if somebody wanted to break in, it would just be a simple matter of kicking the door in. So in both senses, it was an absolute disaster. And they wouldn't do anything. So we sent them a letter saying that you must rehouse this woman, you must move a family in there, you must renovate the place, but in the meantime, this week you've got to give her a new door. And so their response was to issue her an eviction notice, saying that she was responsible for all of the damage. So we obviously didn't take that lying down. We went and organised a delegation to the office, and we got the eviction order lifted and the back door on, and she's now on the emergency transfer list. So a whole series of those kinds of actions, and we've organised as well on a bigger scale around broader issues. We've used the tactic of going door to door, collecting petition signatures, bringing delegations of tenants to their offices. Those things have been effective. In Moss Park, one of the downtown places, we were able to win some fairly substantial repairs to the place. 55 Rankin, which is in the Bloor Symington area, there was an incredible mobilisation. It was a seniors building, largely Korean people, and they organised their own delegation. We got vans and brought them over to the head office and managed to get funds allocated very critically for roof repair.